Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the May 18th, 2021 Salina Planning Commission meeting. First on the agenda is roll call.
It appears that only Commissioner Baffa and Commissioner Hay are absent, and so we have a quorum of 5, so we can conduct business this afternoon. If Margie can confirm that we have met our Kansas Open Meeting Act obligations.
Yes, I can confirm that the packet was posted and the required notice of the meeting was provided.
So for the benefit of commissioners, the Salina City Commission repealed the mask ordinance last night on first and second reading with publication and effect this Friday. However, it was announced that the restrictions on the use of masks inside the city-county building were lifted as of this morning. So how you feel comfortable at the dais and conducting the meeting is at your choice. Staff is all socially distanced, and so it's just a matter of choice at this point, however you feel most comfortable at the dais. So.
Thank you.
Good to know. Thank you very much.
Since you have confirmed that, Margie, then we'll consider the approval of the minutes as item 2.1.
We have a motion for approval of minutes.
I move that we approve the minutes.
I second.
It's been motioned and seconded. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
On to new business.
We have, okay, so the representatives for item 3.1 are joining the meeting via Zoom. And so we do not have any public hearing items on your agenda or legislative matters. The item that's before you today is an amended final development plan, and so that is an administrative item for the Planning Commission. Does not involve conducting a public hearing. It's more or less between the commission and the applicant and their representatives. But by way of background, what is labeled or known as the Matlock Johnson edition was approved by the Planning Commission in 1992, and what that was a subdivision at the northeast corner of Schilling Road and South 9th Street that was anchored by a brand new Sam's Club. And so there was a plat of 44 acres there that had multiple lots, including outlots along 9th Street. The City Commission gave final approval to ordinances that annexed and zoned that property back in 1992, and it was a planned commercial district, so the ordinance that was passed provided that site plans for the remaining lots must be approved by the Planning Commission before building permits were issued. So in April of 1994, Pizza Hut Restaurants filed an application requesting the Planning Commission approve their final site plan for a proposed 3,500 square foot Pizza Hut restaurant on the lot south of Red Lobster. And that was essentially the 5th outlot outside of Sam's Club that was proposed for development, and it was the last lot to be developed in the subdivision. So, Dustin, could you go back to the original layout of Matlock Johnson, the vicinity map? So the layout of the subdivision was 44 acres at this corner. You may recall that Schilling Road was nothing more than a dirt road at that time, so the developers constructed Schilling Road over to an access road here, and then constructed Marketplace as a frontage road. And you may recall that at some of our intersections like Belmont and 9th and other locations where we had the frontage roads right next to 9th Street, there was barely room to stack one car or even get your car straightened out to make a turn. So we kind of changed our planning philosophy on frontage roads, and instead of having the frontage road run right next to 9th Street, that you'd move the frontage road out so that you had lots backing up to 9th Street and moving the frontage road away so that you could have more room to stack traffic to 9th Street and move these entrances away. So this is a substation right here, and this lot you can see is affected by a 100-foot wide transmission line easement that runs diagonally across the property. So the original plan had a single building. It was 3,500 square feet, and it only covered 7% of the lot. It had no direct access to 9th Street, and the front of the building faced to the east towards Marketplace. And when it was originally developed, they had 57 parking spaces out in that area. So the building was pushed way to the west because it couldn't be built under these power lines. And so that really influenced how the property was developed. And so the plan that's being put forward now is to essentially remove and rebuild that east building and turn the existing Pizza Hut restaurant into a delivery carryout location only with no indoor seating, with adding a drive-up window on the south side of the building. There's also a plan to create a second tenant space there. And then, as you can see from the original Pizza Hut plan, the east portion of this lot was primarily used for parking or not used at all. And so the owners are proposing to construct a new building with a 2,000 square foot footprint, and that could be set up to accommodate 1 or 2 tenants, and also set up with the ability to add a drive-through window on the west side if that's what the tenant desired. So their plan is to try to retain and reuse as much of the existing parking lot paving as possible, and to retain existing landscaping where they can, and to reuse the existing utility connections to the lot. The 57 spaces for Pizza Hut was probably excessive for that particular restaurant, and so even though the square footage is proposed to increase from 3,500 to 5,100 square feet, the number of parking spaces proposed is decreasing from 57 to 45, but with the removal of the indoor dining from Pizza Hut, the 45 spaces is more than adequate. So this particular lot is just a little over 1 acre in size. It's part of a larger planned commercial district. It's 141 feet wide and 331 feet deep, and no changes to the size or configuration of that lot is being proposed as part of the redevelopment. Access to the properties from Marketplace, which is a public street, has a right-of-way width of 50 feet and 33 feet of paving. So on a typical local or residential street, you have a 60-foot right-of-way and 33 feet of paving, so there's about 13 feet behind the curb that's right-of-way. In this case, on Marketplace, there's about 8 feet. And the current driveway there is 25 feet in width, and the maximum driveway width allowed under city code is 30 feet measured at the property line. As part of this amended site plan, the property owner's designers are proposing to maintain the single driveway entrance on Marketplace, but they're proposing to expand it from 25 feet to 46 feet measured at the front property line, apparently to try to accommodate truck traffic and deliveries. In reviewing the plan, staff would note to the commission that in addition to exceeding the city's driveway width standards, the proposed driveway far exceeds the width of any other driveway on Marketplace and is even much wider than the street itself. Staff has reviewed this and believes the curb cut width being proposed is excessive. And we've noted that Sam's Club and Target both receive truck deliveries, and none of their driveway openings are as wide as the driveway being proposed by the developer's designers. None of the driveways that serve the new Dillon store are that wide, and so staff believes that that is excessive for the conditions currently on the lot. Just by way of information, the city, based on the city code, we measure our width of driveway at the property line. And so what the designers have done is something that most haven't done, which is to try to increase or include the radius inside the property. And so on most driveways on public streets, the radius, curb radius would start at the property line and fan out, but they have extended it farther in, which makes the measurement at the actual property line. So this measurement here is a reasonable width right at 30 feet, but it's this width out here where we measure the width that makes that driveway width excessive. You can do what you want with the radiuses out within the right-of-way, but it's primarily this area here that is on private property that's wider than the city's driveway width standard and wider than any driveway anywhere in the vicinity. As far as the public utilities and services and storm drainage, all the services that serve Pizza Hut are in place and can be reused for this redevelopment. Dustin, I don't know, you could go back to an aerial photo or to the overall site plan for the subdivision. So it's a little counterintuitive, but what happens with the drainage is that all this drainage from Sam's Club and from Marketplace here drains into this pond here that's north of Sam's Club. And then there's a pump in that pond, and there's a pipe that comes all the way across here, and it sends the water right to this corner. It goes down 9th Street to a ditch that crosses over and goes that way. So the water first drains north, and then it drains south. And the reason that it did is that there has been off and on flooding along South 9th Street from all the water moving from south to north, and so this was essentially reverse engineered to send the water back here so it wouldn't be discharged to the north. The buildings that are proposed would be oriented to face east with their main storefronts facing Marketplace and secondary entrances on the south side. So I believe that is the east building or the west building, Dustin?
This is the east building.
Okay, so the east building, you can see that the main storefront glass, the main width is the south elevation, but it will also have an elevation that's oriented towards Marketplace. Because Pizza Hut is transitioning to delivery or carry out only, there will be a drive-through pickup window on the south side of the window, or south side of the building. The east building, or the east building face is being designed to accommodate a pickup window on the west side. So I guess this south elevation facing the substation, this is where the pickup window for Pizza Hut would be. And so this is what you would see from Marketplace, this is what you would see from 9th Street, and then that is what is facing north towards Red Lobster. The building setbacks all conform with minimum setback requirements. The west building, 27 feet from 9th Street, is pretty close to 9th Street compared to the other buildings along there, but it's because of that 100-foot wide Evergy transmission line easement that really forces that building to the west. So the big changes are that the lot coverage would increase from 7% to 10.7%. The other being that only 37% of the developed site would be green space. And so as far as the building design, from what we can tell, the exteriors will be primarily cement plaster finish with stone veneer on the stone fronts, and then mostly earth tone with slate color used to provide contrast. And you can note the bright red canopies to identify the Pizza Hut. So as we noted, 45 spaces are being proposed. The primary reason for the reduction being the elimination of indoor dining at Pizza Hut. And so we've determined that the 45 spaces is sufficient, and all of the dimensions within the parking lot and driving aisles meet the city's requirements. Staff's only issue is with the width of the actual driveway approach on Marketplace. There are no designated loading and unloading zones or areas designated on the site plan, but as we've discussed before, particularly with restaurants, in the alternative, we've allowed the property owner to furnish staff with a written letter confirming that the supply deliveries for the Pizza Hut and other tenants would occur outside regular business hours. And if you do that, it doesn't matter if drive aisles or parking spaces are occupied by delivering vehicles if it's after hours. The other thing that we would note is that this development would have a requirement with the two front yards of a little over 3,900 square feet of front yard landscaped area, and they're providing about 2,600 square feet, about a third less than what would be required under our ordinance. And the primary reasons for this are twofold. One is the drive-through lane paving added to the west side of the west building essentially is substituting concrete paving for landscaping. And then, of course, the wider your entrance drive is, the less space you have for front yard landscaping along South 9th Street. One of the mitigating factors that the designers and the owners are facing is that transmission line easement. And so, because the building is pushed so far west, if you put a drive-through lane on the west side, you've pretty much wiped out the 27-foot front yard there, so there's much less space for landscaping. If you look at the total amount of tree units provided, it's far, far less than what was shown on the original Pizza Hut plan, but is within the range in terms of actual plantings of what our landscape regulations would apply for a site like this with two front yards. The only other subject that we haven't touched on was signage, and we did not receive any kind of submittal related to ground or pole signs. The Planning Commission previously approved a 70-square-foot pole sign on 9th Street for Pizza Hut. That sign may continue to be used or reused. Some of the elevation drawings did show wall signage, but that would be worked out with the owner as tenants come along. So as you look at your alternatives this afternoon, we have reviewed the plan to determine compliance with city ordinances, regulations, and policies. The two areas that we determine do not comply with city standards are the amount of front yard green space and the width of the driveway on Marketplace. You are to review the plans to determine if they demonstrate a satisfactory quality of design and compatibility with other uses and structures in the neighborhood. And so you could approve the proposed amended plan as submitted. You could approve the amended plan subject to certain revisions or conditions. You could postpone consideration to a future meeting date if you feel like you as a commission need additional information from staff or the applicant. Or you could recommend that the amended site plan be resubmitted after substantial revisions to the plan design are made. So if you think there's so many revisions or major shifts or changes that you feel need to be made, then one option would be to have them go back to the drawing board, so to speak, and resubmit a plan that's revised from what you're seeing this afternoon. As far as our comments are concerned, as we noted, we think the 46-foot curb cut is excessive and can't be justified. We recently approved a curb cut for a truck wash that does nothing but wash semi-trucks, and even their driveway's not this wide, and it's designed exclusively for semis. And then staff would also request that the applicant explain the substantial reduction in front yard landscaping. And then we believe that additional information needs to be provided about loading zones and any plans for additional signage. So if the driveway opening is reduced in width, if the applicant provides justification for the reduced front yard landscaping from what's currently there, and additional information about loading and loading zones and signage to your satisfaction, we would recommend approval of this proposed amended site plan subject to the conditions that we've outlined on page 8. If that information is not provided to your satisfaction, then we would recommend that consideration of this item be postponed to allow those issues to be resolved. So we had a lot of graphics and drawings in your packet, and Dustin displayed quite a few during my presentation, but if there's anything you want to go back and see again, let us know, or if you have questions about a specific topic.
I do have a question regarding to we talked about the frontage landscaping on 9th Street. Because that building on the west side of the property was built quite a while ago, does it qualify for any kind of like being grandfathered in, or are we factoring into our decision-making they're working with
Well,
on that section of an existing structure?
the main thing is, and it may or may not show up clearly here, but the main thing is that here's the existing Pizza Hut building. And so everything from here, this wall, over to the 9th Street property line is green space and landscaping. And then if you go to the new plan, they have wrapped this driveway around the building. So all this area that is landscaping today is being eliminated and replaced by paving. And so just the amount of, if you look at a front yard as the front 25 feet of the property on 9th Street, under the Pizza Hut original plan, 100% of the area between the building and street was green space. Under this plan, a substantial part of it is paving. So by that very nature, the landscaping area has been reduced. The question for the commission is you can make up for reduced area by having essentially the equivalent amount of plants or plantings that you would have if you had more area. And so we have kind of a ratio that says if you're required to have this much square foot area, you have to have this many plant units within that area. They come close to having the number of plant units that they would need to have if they had the area. So they are attempting to compensate in two ways. One, by having a roughly equivalent amount of plant material that would be required. And then also, they've got some islands or peninsulas within the parking lot area here that we don't credit for front yard, but does provide landscaping and green space. So it's a judgment call for you as a commission, or myself as a zoning administrator. I can reduce, and you can reduce the amount of front yard green space if you think the intent of the landscaping regulations is still being met. So we're just pointing out that the reason for the large reduction in total square footage is primarily because this was all green space today, and if you put this drive-through in there, you're reducing the green space. And then, of course, if you widen a driveway or add a driveway, then you're reducing the green space in the front yard along Marketplace as well. So,
So if they reduce the width of that driveway, it would help them out a bit.
if they reduced it, it would help them by providing additional green space in the front yard along Marketplace. I mean, there's nothing you could do on the west building. You can't shift the building. Well, can't you shift the building closer east and move or shift everything east to have more green space along 9th Street? You can't do that because you can see this right here is right to the edge, and Evergy will not allow. They don't want tall trees, and they don't want buildings, and they don't want fences, and they basically don't want anything vertical underneath their transmission line. So,
And my take on it is that lot's kind of offering some, well, not kind of, it's definitely offering some challenges that are not the norm.
yes.
So maybe a little leniency might be in order, but that's just my opinion on it. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts pertaining to it.
I agree, Greg.
Yeah, there's not a lot of design options or shifting that
Right.
they can do.
Right.
And so if you're gonna have a drive-through lane, you can't shift everything to the east. And so circulation wise, that's the way it best works out. And it doesn't really matter whether you have the pickup window on the west side or the south side, or it doesn't matter. That's the circulation that works. But
Dean, are those islands, they're going to be landscaped by the parking right there?
These do not appear to be.
those appear to
Just
be
marking.
just striped and marked. And so we would expect that these would have curbs and would be, these are really peninsulas, but we give them credit as islands. And so
Okay.
we have a requirement in our landscape regulations that if you have a parking lot that has more than 50 parking spaces in it, you have to set aside a certain amount of that for islands within the parking lot. Well, this parking lot's gone from over 50 to under 50, so essentially those islands are voluntary. And so it's just that our ordinance puts an emphasis on front yard landscaping to buffer the building from the street, but you are, as a commission, perfectly free to recognize the efforts they've made for the internal landscaping as well.
So I have a question then on, so current city ordinance is 25, or up to 30 feet for the drive, 30 feet for the driveway.
Measured
And-
at the property line, yeah.
Right, and so what is the issue with going with a larger? Why is that, why does that become an issue on the city's part?
Well, if you
Why
had,
is it determined at 30?
the reason it's at 30, because if you have the most common width is 25 feet, 30 is the max, and it's the same reason. If you had a 46-foot street, then people would be wondering if it's 4-lane, 3-lane, or 2-lane, because if you have something that's 46 feet wide, then people, if it's 30 feet wide or 25 feet wide, you can essentially fit 2 cars in it, one coming out, one going in. But if it's 46 feet wide, then people may come out and think that there's a separate left turn lane, or they may come out in pairs, or they may not know what the pattern is. So the reason for the 30-foot driveway is so that cars know that the right side's for exiting and the other right side's for entering. But if you're at 46 feet, then you've got, is it 2 lanes out, 1 lane in? And so once you get over 30 feet, then cars don't really know, and drivers, how it's set up, unless you've got an island or something like that. So that's the basis for the 30 feet. The other reason for that is, that applies in residential areas too, and so you probably don't want your neighbor having a 60-foot lot and putting in a 60-foot driveway, so.
Okay, no, that helps clarify it, so.
Dustin, can you go back to the plan that had that, I believe the 30 and the 46 as a red line on the right side? Yeah, so for clarification, this says that the measurement is at the front property line, which is right where your cursor is that right?
Correct.
Okay, I'm just clarifying that. That's where the property line is, okay.
So if they kind of took this and it basically extended that at the same angle out to here and then started their radius, they would, so if they just kept this same configuration, got to here, and then had the big sweeping radius, is basically this area here.
Okay.
And you could say it's a technicality, but from the standpoint of being consistent and measuring that width at the property line, having a radius that sweeping is really unusual. And so what we tell people, and especially places that are trying to accommodate trucks, is that you can have as sweeping a radius as you want out in the right-of-way, but once you get to the property line going in, it has to be a maximum of 30 feet. And so the other challenge here is that if you have a street that has 13 feet behind the curb, you have more space to have a radius. Here, there's only 8.5 feet from the curb to here, and so if they straightened this out and then started the radius curve here and did that here, they could still have the sweeping radius for turns or to accommodate delivery trucks or things like that, but wouldn't have the 46 feet at the property line. So it's really the big sweeping radiuses that are affecting that.
Okay,
And
thank you.
I don't know if you want to go back to the aerial photo, Dustin, but you could see just comparatively what the existing driveway looks like, or what Target looks like, where the radiuses are out in the street. So here's Red Lobster, here's this is Target, and so none of those driveways have that kind of radius that's going into the property. The radiuses on the curbs are all out in the right-of-way.
So I've got to kind of staying on this same vein then. In our packet, there's a diagram that shows the cars in the drive-through, total number of cars in each of the drive-throughs. Can you pull that up?
Can you find the title for me? That would help you.
It says Shops at Salina, proposed site plan, site summary, and it shows vehicles in each of the drive-throughs.
Okay, maybe it's the architect's plans. Yep, that's it.
Yep, that one. So kind of 2 questions going into this. So The requirement for the number of cars through a drive-through, how many do they have to be able to accommodate at the pickup window itself? And then with that, where would the ordering station actually end up being, saying on this first one that's listed as a coffee house? And my question, the reason for that is if the order station is towards the front of the building, then you're going to back traffic up as people are sitting there waiting to get in off. And I'm curious if that's not part of the reason for the wider drive and that sweep, that they're anticipating people are going to be stopped there and they're going to be kind of around that corner getting into it.
Yeah, so to answer your question, what we require is 4 stacking spaces at what we call the ordering station, and sometimes it's a window, sometimes it's a microphone setup, and another 4 at the pickup window for a total of 8, not less than 8.
Okay.
And so they're not actually showing where that ordering station would be, but that is important. So in this design, it would have to be about where my cursor is here in order for them to have the appropriate stacking.
Okay.
So
And
just to, Ms. Destin and I talk about that frequently, and I am frustrated every time I go there, but we misread the plans for the taco place in front of the mall. And so they have like 1 stacking space at the ordering station because we misread and they misidentified. So what they have is they have like 7 stacking spaces from the drive-up window to the ordering station, but they have 1 stacking space at the ordering station, which means if you get very many cars there, the cars are all hanging out into the Central Mall's drive-through. So Mr. Olson's point is well taken as far as the Taco Bell there goes. And so why that is important is it's important to know, so if we let them put the ordering station right here, then all these cars are going to back up here. So they need to have the ordering station up here so that cars can be lined up here waiting to order, and then these are for the pickup, and it would be the same here. So when we get plans like this, they look like, well, they've got the 8 to 9 spaces, but it's also important where the ordering station is, because as Mr. Olson points out, that if you put the ordering station right here, like it is at Taco Bell, then all the cars are either hanging out there or they're blocking all these people here.
And that was the one I was thinking of
Yes.
when I
And
was
so-
asking the question in the wider drive. If they were anticipating putting it there, that would be part of the reason
Someday
for
I'm
the
going to
wider
persuade the owner of Taco Bell to move his ordering station to where it was shown originally. But yes, that's we can always pull that one out and show the planning commission what we don't want. So,
Hi, this is Monica Smith. I'm the developer of the project. And just for clarification, first of all, thank you very much for hearing our plans today. But as far as the Pizza Hut is concerned, there will be no ordering station.
Okay.
Okay, good to know.
App or call in and then simply pick up their pizza at the window. So there'd be no call box or order box, if you will, for our location.
but there is a possibility of a tenant in the east building having an ordering station.
Correct. There is a possibility. You're absolutely right.
Okay.
So with that so since we've been on the topic of the drive as it is, so can you explain to us what your reasoning is for the 40-foot-6 width of the driveway at the property line?
I'm going to defer to our civil engineer, but I believe that we can accommodate the city's request to reduce that size.
Yes, and so my name's Emily Shelton. I'm working with Monica on this project. You'll see grayed out in the background the exact reason why we're proposing this is we've got a WB50 truck who's going to come in and go back out. There's not enough room on site for them to turn around and for a truck to back directly out and into our site, and so that would be our Y. They'll just have to swing out into adjacent lanes in order to make those deliveries work. And we're not anticipating those deliveries happening at peak hours. As you can see, and we discussed the loading here, we haven't designated loading spaces because we do not anticipate the loading to occur during normal business hours. But to answer the question on the table, I believe we can get it down to 30 feet at the property line.
Okay, thank you very much.
And I missed part of that. Where's the proposed loading at for each of those locations on this diagram that's up currently?
Yeah, so the proposed loading, the truck, and you see it grayed out in the background on your screen, thanks for sharing. The truck is just proposed to pull straight in and then pull straight back out. There is no stripes area. The loading is, because the loading is not occurring during peak hours, there's not a designated station or parking space for this.
So what they're saying is consistent with, we've had that with Freddy's and with Chick-fil-A and others, is that they, rather than taking up space or designate a specific spot for a loading unloading zone like you might have behind a grocery store or behind Sam's Club, what they're proposing is that they'll just utilize these areas, and we don't want them to be in conflict with when they have customers there. So what they would do is just agree that deliveries for the two tenant buildings would occur after business hours, so there wouldn't be any conflict. And that's kind of common with trash pickup as well. A lot of these businesses arrange to have their trash picked up at 5 in the morning or 5:30 in the morning when they're not open for business, and then the trash trucks and the delivery trucks aren't conflicting with parked vehicles. So that is a fairly common when you have a food service business.
I can see the 46 feet if a semi's going to have to park and back out though too. I know it's an odd situation on an odd lot, but
Yeah, it's not so much the ability to have 46 feet, it's just where the 46-foot width is. And so there's nothing wrong with their radiuses, it's just a matter of where the taper
Okay.
starts.
Any other questions for the applicant?
So we just, and maybe they can reiterate what their approach was to their landscaping plan, but just what the deciding factors were in their design and their proposal. Obviously, the addition of the drive-through lane west of the west building eliminates that green space, but we might ask that applicant what the guiding principles were for what they're trying to achieve with their landscape plan.
Sure, I can take, is that a question for us?
Yeah, just
Okay.
what the design, what your design is intended to achieve.
Yes. And so you'll see a little bit grayed back on the north side of our plan that you see adjacent parking to the north of that. Well, you all have been out to the Red Lobster. What we're showing as far as our drive-through limits are consistent with their paving limits. And actually, I believe ours are a little bit more conservative than theirs. So they're actually closer to 9th than we are. And as far as the overall landscaping plan, we have some great big trees on the south side of our site, so we've taken every effort to preserve those. You've heard some pavement and some curb being kept intact just to keep those healthy. And so using those and then adding to the site wherever we can as far as land you'll see, I'm not sure if you all have the ability to pull up Google Earth, but it's a little gray out there right now. While the square footage, it may not show that we're adding additional landscaping, you'll see, yeah, it's a perfect picture. The whole middle of that island, I don't know that you can call that landscaping. I think it is by code, but we're certainly trying to improve the existing. Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of hardscaping there, which I think actually counts, and there's some shrubs, but we're really looking to give that an upgrade with the other proposed landscaping around the site. So is that a good enough explanation? And actually, if this is a great aerial image. You'll see how close the driveway is north of our site with Red Lobster. So the reason why we felt it was okay to put a drive-through on the west side of our site is consistent with the state to the north. And we're actually not as far west as they are with our pavement limits, but mirroring what's out there today.
Yeah, I think we're primarily just trying best to understand what landscaping that was there today you were going to try to preserve and what was going to just be starting from scratch new. So that helps a lot.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you very much. We really appreciate your clarity on that. It helped quite a bit.
Thank you all for hearing this.
Oh, we have one other question. It just relates to, as part of the elevations and everything submitted, there wasn't anything proposing any new signage. Are you just going to primarily focus on building signage and reuse the sign that's out along 9th Street?
I'll try to take this one. We can do one pylon sign, if that works. We have a signage package that we can submit to planning or to this board. Apologies that it wasn't routed in the middle, but we do have a signage package, like as far as freestanding signs go. Is that what you're concerned with? Or
Yeah, primarily if the number of, so for instance, there's an existing pole sign out along 9th Street. I think that pole sign, square footage wise, might be the smallest one along that frontage. So if you said, well, we want to reuse the existing pole, but we want to increase the sign area on the sign, that would be fine. I think this board is primarily interested in whether you were looking to add additional freestanding signs or a sign on Marketplace or any of those things. That would be good to know at today's meeting before they act.
Gotcha. Yes. And so one additional, but yes, you're exactly right. We would look to reuse that existing pole sign and then add a sign underneath for future tenants. So Pizza Hut will no longer be the only tenant here. We would like to add to the square footage of that sign and then a monument sign along.
So I think those were the 4 areas where staff had some questions about the driveway opening, about the front yard total area, the unloading and unloading, and any planned signage. And I think that the applicant hit on all those. The only thing I would point out would be to look at condition number 1 on page 8, and given the fact that the applicant is requesting the addition of a monument sign, then it may be appropriate, if the Planning Commission is supportive of that, to amend condition number 1 to say, instead of the word or, have the word and, so that signage shall be limited to one pole sign and one ground sign as opposed to or. Given their plans to try to put a monument sign out along Marketplace, we would want to try to accommodate that in condition number 1.
Think we're ready for a motion, or do we need further discussion?
I guess I just have one question on it. So still on number 1 on page 8. So permitted sign area is 120 square feet for the pole sign?
For the pole sign, not including the ground sign.
Okay. And so ground sign would have its own limitations that would have
Yes.
to meet requirements? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Then I would make a motion to approve application Z92-8F with staff recommendations on page 8.
And that would include one pole sign
And
up to
one
30
ground
feet in height, 120 square feet, and one ground sign on Marketplace.
Yes.
I would second that motion.
Do we need to identify the 46 to 30 feet also on the approach?
Well, I think if you want to say that with the driveway width limited to 30 feet at the property line, and you want to incorporate that, and if Mr. Olson's agreeable and Mr. Gilmore's agreeable to that, that could be incorporated in that motion as well.
Yes, I am, and thank you for reminding me of that.
Same.
Okay, it's been motioned and seconded. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so that motion carries 5-0. So for the benefit of the applicants, you have an approved site plan subject to those conditions from which you can submit a building permit for.
Thank you very much.
And we will
Very excited.
we'll communicate today's actions to you in a letter and writing, and then you are free to submit your building permit plans at any time. There's no waiting period.
Wonderful. Thank you all again.
All right.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
We are very excited.
Thank you.
So, we've taken note of the fact that Mr. Baffa was unable to attend today's meeting, and we've actually had this on our discussion list for some time, because just so you will see discussions come up about landscaping, and we've got some newer members on the commission, and we haven't done as good a job as we could as far as background, but the city commission adopted a set of landscaping regulations for the first time in 1994 as an amendment to the zoning ordinance, and prior to that time, there were no landscape standards to apply to site plans or projects. And then, if some of you recall, back in 2006, we had kind of a drought emergency in the city. We had water conservation. We had some limits on outdoor watering and a number of things. And when the ordinance was passed in 1994, there was a lot of debate about mandating automatic irrigation systems, and the Planning Commission, City Commission decided they didn't want to go so far as to mandate that you had to install irrigation systems. Mr. Bernhardt may have his own thoughts on that, but as a planner, I've had lots of experiences where what happens on even a project like you see today is that you get design professionals and people that are involved in the design and construction phase, and then you get store managers or others who don't even know what they have, and they're primarily focused on what's going on in their store. And so, I mean, an example that comes to mind to me was at the Office Max and Goodwill out there, the very first winter that was out there. They didn't drain their irrigation lines down or everything froze and broke, and store manager didn't know that they had an irrigation system, didn't know that he was supposed to be doing anything with that. And I've run into that with other locations where we're talking about maintaining detention ponds, and you go out to the store and it's like, what pond? And you walk back behind the store and say, that pond back there. So there's a tendency that these things get designed, or an irrigation system gets designed, but it's not maintained, and then it becomes a liability instead of an asset. So there was a choice made not to require automatic irrigation. And then in 2006, there was a concern that we might be having a planting list that had varieties on it that required a great deal of watering. And so there was a lot of focus at that time of trying to modify our landscaping regulations. And instead of having a recommended tree list, we came up with a recommended Xeriscape planting list. And so I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Hers, who was involved with the city forester and others in kind of putting that together and changing the focus from recommended planting list to a Xeriscape list, and what we were trying to achieve there. So
yes, in 2006, we had the drought conditions within the community, which really made people question how we were going about requiring landscaping and what we could do to have an ordinance or regulation that promoted landscaping and attractive streetscapes while still not requiring a lot of resources in terms of water and time to maintain. And so in our research and in our conversations with subject matter experts, we came up with a number of people that we engaged and talked to and worked with to create a recommended Xeriscape plant list. And the individuals and entities that we worked with at that time were the Salina City Forester at the time, who was Steve Blue, who has since retired, the K-State Extension Office, the Dick Arboretum of the Plains out of Heston, and local landscape providers at the time, those landscapers who were actively designing plans and actively working to maintain existing landscaping. And this recommended list consists of different types of plantings, shade trees, ornamental trees, shrubs, ground covers, flowers that are conducive to our climate zone and our annual rainfall, and are hardy to hot conditions as well as cold conditions, because here in Kansas we get extremes on both ends, and not all plants can handle that situation. So what we have is a list of plantings that hopefully, if you were to select from this list, will have a high chance of survival with minimal maintenance. And the reason we're bringing this up and talking today is, in the past, there's been commissioners that have had a couple of concerns. The first concern being that this list was created in 2008, and since then, there are other varieties of plantings that are now available, with many of them being more popular, meaning that some of the plants and trees and types of varieties that are on the recommended tree list are a little more difficult to find now than they were in 2008. and may need to be either replaced or new modern plantings that are more readily available but achieve the same characteristics that the plants on the recommended list achieve could be added to the list. Another concern is that the list does not identify which plantings are native and which ones aren't. It doesn't differentiate between native plantings and non-native plantings. So it's been our observation and conversations that we've had with the board that some of the commissioners may be interested in reviewing the recommended list and engaging subject matter experts, again, similar to what we did in 2008, to create a new updated list. And so that's really what we're here to talk about. And so you have a couple of options. One is to direct staff to re-engage those subject matter experts. If there's additional subject matter experts that you know of that we didn't use in 2008, we can certainly add those to the list of people to consult and work with. So that's one option, to look at updating the list with those subject matter experts. The other option is saying, well, it may be somewhat outdated, but now is not the right time to look at it, and we'll just keep it as it is. So those are the two options we identified, and really it's just an open discussion about what the Planning Commission feels in terms of their observations or feedback that they may have gotten with people in the public that have engaged you about landscaping in the city of Salina and our current list of recommended plantings. I think our goal would still be to have plantings that are of a xeriscape nature, meaning that they're hardy and drought tolerant. So we wouldn't want to just open it up to necessarily trees and plantings that are popular, but it would still maintain the characteristics and the objective of the list, and that's to make sure that plantings from the list do well year-round with low maintenance, and they're not a maintenance issue. That's the last thing we want is having landscaping that's constantly dying and people are fighting it. Business owners are fighting their own landscaping. We want it to look attractive with minimal effort if we can. And with that, we'll open up to discussion or questions.
And I guess another objective, and it's been one of the challenges, and you've heard it here in meetings, is that there's not a full meeting of the minds among different groups of what constitutes a native plant. You can't just go somewhere and say this is, so different people are going to have different views. Our goal is to make sure that we don't have plants on here that are outdated and no longer readily available, that we add plants that are currently available or maybe hybrids or varieties that aren't recognized. And then the other goal, just for educational purposes, is to create a third column over here with the word native in it, if it's native. And so our belief as a staff is when we look at these lists and we cross-reference them, that a fairly high percentage of the shrubs and the plants and grasses and trees on the xeriscaping list are native, but they're not identified and they're not mutually agreed upon. But before we can encourage business owners, property owners, others, encourage them to use native varieties, there has to be an agreement as to what those are. And so there's more education needed along those lines, and we've had, I think, on at least 3 occasions, we have had invited and had representatives from the Dick Arboretum in Heston come and be a resource for the Planning Commission and to answer questions and how they arrive at some of their varieties there. And so we have provided in your packet a native plant guide from 2017 from the Dick Arboretum. And what we have done is taken their list and compared it with our list, and what we find is that there's a lot of crossover between their native list and our list, but they have also marked on their list where there's a variety that they've identified as new. And so this is now almost 4 years old, so Mr. Bernhardt might not think they're new anymore, or there may be other ones that are new. But that's really the thought, is whether we have resources in the community, we have people that are executing planting plans out in the field on behalf of property owners and developers, and so we would want to, send this out and get feedback. I guess that's the primary question for the Planning Commission is, are there resources besides those that we've identified that you would like us to reach out to and try to get input from on our list?
Yeah, and I didn't have a third option under alternatives, but with Commissioner Baffa not being here and being one of the commissioners that's really passionate about this, a third option could be to postpone in-depth conversation to when he's here to have that conversation, if that's something that you're interested in. But so you could direct us to re-engage a list of people who, we've got our list that we've already identified who would be subject matter experts, but you can add any names that or contacts that you might have, or you could just say that the list is good for now and we can visit it at another time, and we can do that. Those are the three options.
I think we'd be remiss if we didn't include Commissioner Baffa in this conversation. And I'm sure he'd have, it's just unfortunate he's not here, but I'm sure he'd have some very valuable input. And obviously Commissioner Barnhart's going to have a tremendous amount of information for us as well. And
That'll give me time. I might be able to pull together some people too that might
Sure.
be interested in helping us out with that.
Yeah.
Definitely include the local
I think that's the
businesses.
primary thing, is that we don't want to miss anybody that could provide us with knowledgeable input, and so letting Mr. Bernhardt digest this and maybe come back and give us some thoughts so that we can get this distributed out and get some input. I think, you've got the county extension here, but there's also a professor at K-State who is somewhat of a native planting researcher and advocate, and so we can reach out to them for guidance, but as far as local things and resources, Mr. Bernhardt might be in the best position to come back and give us a list, but our thought is that we didn't realize at the time we were pulling all this together that Mr. Baffa wouldn't be at today's meeting, and so we're fully prepared to carry it over to a future agenda, but we primarily wanted to have this opportunity to put this in your packet so you saw the background of how long have we had landscaping regulations, what was the thought process of those involved to get where we are here. And the other thing that the city has since discontinued, but I've got one in my yard. The city used to have a rebate program, and so if you would put a tree in your front parking, or in the alternative in your front yard, if you had overhead wires, you could purchase and plant the tree, turn your receipt in to city forestry, and they would cut a rebate check to try to, but they would only do it if the tree that you planted was from the recommended list. So it was their way of diversifying the trees and reducing the number of Bradford pears. I lost my Bradford pear in an ice storm, just like so many other people, and replaced it with something on the recommended list. So that is the original origin of the recommended list, was part of the tree rebate program. So then we just use that as a basis. And so we've had different, and Mr. Bernhardt will appreciate this, when the Lowe's store, they were coming to town and they submitted their first plan, they accidentally, because they do a lot of stores, they accidentally submitted their landscape plan was cut and pasted from a store they did in Huntsville, Alabama. And so we looked at the plan and said, well, this isn't going to work in Salina, Kansas. None of these things are going to thrive or survive here. So,
No palm trees, huh?
yeah, so that's, the idea is that we're just kind of right on the border. We're not western Kansas, but we're not eastern Kansas, and sometimes we have enough water, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we have extreme temperatures, and so we're just trying to, and we're generally receptive to new varieties that are proposed, but given that we haven't looked at this since 2006, it's perfectly appropriate to give this another look and take advantage of the people who are more knowledgeable than planning staff is about these things. So our thought would be, with your agreement, that we have a meeting scheduled for the first Tuesday in June. We would just carry this over and hope that, one, Mr. Baffa will be here to provide his input, and two, Mr. Bernhardt can come back with his list of who he thinks we should reach out to here locally to get feedback.
Yeah. Is this something, if we do proceed with this, is this something that we could do like just a study session somewhere where we can bring in everybody and like even just go through the list? Yes,
Yeah,
no?
I mean, now that
Rather than just everybody's
restrictions are being lifted, and Mr. Baffa made reference to, the city does have a tree advisory board, and this planning commission has cooperated with them on landscape awards over the years. And so in the past, we had a joint study session with the tree advisory board.
Cool.
And
Perfect.
that would probably be an appropriate thing, and have the city forester here and things like that. It's just as, obviously, we haven't been conducting any study sessions because the conditions aren't really conducive to that. But, we could have a study session. The one we had was in this room. We coordinated and had representatives from Dick Arboretum, from K-State, and our local resources, our city forester, and the tree board, and so get as much input as we can. But yes, a study session is probably more conducive to that.
I think our biggest asset is probably just our local landscapers, just for a simple reason that when we buy our plant product materials, we don't get the warranty. We give the warranty, so we're very selective on what we pick, especially for commercial stuff. So even though it's on the list, a lot of times we don't agree with it. We know what's going to grow. We know, because we have to back that personally. So I think just our local landscapers will have a lot of input and help out a lot with that too.
Okay, so I think that's the thought, is that even if we bring this back to you in June, when Dustin gave you option one about directing staff to reengage local and regional subject matter experts, that could, it could be sending stuff out. It also could be sending stuff out and then reconvening here with a study session to receive input and allow our landscapers to appear in person. And sometimes there's landscapers who don't agree with each other. So that's always good to get the diversity of views. And then we've also got people who are irrigation contractors, and they have thoughts. So.
Makes sense. Derek, I'm curious, you've been in this business for quite a while. I'm sure there's even nuances to our town. Like, there's probably parts of town where that's going to grow decent versus,
Soil
hey, this
type
is...
and,
Yeah.
absolutely. There are different areas in town, different soil areas, and it depends from year to year. We're seeing some of these plants, like I saw one on here, just a butterfly bush. Get a late freeze, which we usually do, it's going to die. So there's just, over the time, and that's why I think getting a lot of these landscape owners in here that have seen it over the years are different cold snaps we can have, different water like we're having now, too much water, not enough water, and
Or
Yeah,
me
too much
trying to
water.
explain to my wife that the purple fountain grass that she bought is
Yeah.
only going to live 1 year and
Well,
then
it
it's
don't
going to
come back.
die
Yeah.
over the winter, and then I have to dig it out and replace it with another one.
exactly. So,
So how often do some of these plant lists change as far as, I mean, with technology we have, I imagine you're seeing new,
and that's just it. I don't think we need to get too detailed as down to the variety, just an overall, if, like, I like how they just said landscape roses, that's good, because there's many kinds of landscape roses, drift rose, knockout rose, there's different types of roses, so I don't think we need to get too detailed in it, just look at it as a big picture here, because a lot of these are going to have so many varieties under it. But to answer your question, like you say, with the technology now, there's, we get a book from each grower that thick every year, new products, so it's, but it all ties back to the main plant, so, like I say, we wouldn't need to get that detailed.
Yeah, and our list may not need to be as long as it is now. We might just have groupings as opposed to,
Yeah, absolutely.
detailed list, and that's maybe where we end up. But, so, I guess I don't think we need a specific motion or anything. If there's just a general consensus that you'd like to have this put back on so that we can get feedback from Mr. Baffa, and then Mr. Bernhardt could bring us back a list of people he thinks we should use as resources, then we'll put this back on your next agenda. And your agenda in June is going to have, it's basically going to consist of 3 conditional use permits. The daycare over there on variances first, and then if those are approved, then it would come to the Planning Commission for a conditional use. And just a little bit of the reason that we do that is because under a conditional use, one of the findings that the Planning Commission is supposed to make is that the use and the property as proposed conforms with all the zoning district requirements. Well, if it doesn't fit, the way that can be remedied is by the Board of Zoning Appeals approving a variance to a particular standard, and if they approve a variance, then you as a commission can say that it complies because the BZA has weighed in and said it is should be granted a variance. So 2 of the 3 cases you have will be something that the Board of Zoning Appeals will see first this Thursday, and then come before you in June. And then there's another group daycare request. And so just like housing, there is still a great need within the community for childcare and group daycare. And so I think the health department is encouraging their good providers to bump up to the group category so that they can care for more kids at one time and increase capacity. And we still do that as a conditional use, and Dustin and I still have, when we send our letters out, and we do have neighbors who have opinions about having group daycares in their neighborhood or in close proximity, so that's why we have a hearing with you, so they can voice any concerns or ask any questions that they have. So Margie can tell me the exact date in June, but it's the 1st, isn't it?
June 1st.
Yeah, so it'll be the day after Memorial Day. And so despite the fact that Monday's a holiday, Tuesday is not, so.
all right.
So I think we don't have anybody there for a public forum, do we, Dustin?
No, we currently, we don't have anybody else on Zoom at the moment.
So we don't have any further business for you this evening unless you have some questions of us.
Ready for a motion for adjournment?
I make a motion to adjourn.
I second.
It's been motioned and seconded. Those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Adjourned.